Hi there, welcome to Fuel for Thought, your weekly look at all things energy related and beyond. Scott Squires, pleased as always to be joined by the insider, Dan McTeague. And Dan, a couple things to talk to. I know you're on a bit of a time crunch this week, so we'll move this along as quickly as possible. What are you seeing with prices at the pumps? You know, diesel, gas, even home heating fuel. I know here in the Atlantic region, it's been pretty much an upward trend the last few weeks. What are you seeing in this region, the rest of the country, and where are we headed?
An eye-popping increase in diesel prices right across the Atlantic provinces, especially Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, which saw average prices move up about 7, 8 cents a liter. I'd expect at least five, but even that wasn't getting a lot of attention. I note that the two websites that I have, Gas Price Wizard and Canadians for Affordable Energy, both of which have the predicted gas prices, weren't getting a lot of attention. And yet here they are this morning complaining that they didn't see this coming. Well, look, folks, if you don't check it out a day in advance, I can't force you to look at these things. But it has a lot to do with what we normally see during the winter, which is diesel prices, home heating fuel prices, furnace oil prices heading up, mostly in response to what we're seeing across much of the northern hemisphere around the world, and that's Arctic cold hitting us for January, as we would expect this time of year, likely to last into January. But this year is a little bit more significant in that it could be a lot colder for much longer, and so that's something we haven't been used to the past couple of years. There's a whole pile of reasons for that. Gasoline prices went up a couple of pennies, nothing crazy, nothing to write home about. We've seen this across much of North America over the past week. So Atlantic Canada caught up with that, but it does suggest that for the next couple of months, we're going to continue to see upward pressure on energy prices with or without Donald Trump coming to power. But we're also having to acknowledge that since Christmas or just before Christmas, oil's up about 8, 9, 10 bucks a barrel in response to the fact that we're not producing enough and demand is extraordinarily high globally.
We're getting into the mid dollar 60s for a liter of regular gasoline here in this region. Are we looking for it to go even higher over the coming weeks, Dan, do you think?
Gasoline, not so much. I could see 3 cents, maybe 4 cents most by the beginning of March, but nothing crazy on that front. We actually might get a week where it drops. That's because inventories are pretty strong for what's called products. That's diesel, gasoline. But we are going to continue to see upward pressure on diesel, and I think another 8 to 10 cents a liter is certainly in store. So the $1.65, $1.70, $1.80 that you're seeing could move up an average of about 10 cents a liter, depending where you are in Atlantic Canada as well. Oil isn't going to stop where it is today. Next week, a new administration, U.S. President Trump gets sworn in for a second time. Going to be putting sanctions on Iran and Russia. So that means global supply could be further constricted, and Russia won't be able to cheat to the extent that it did in sending oil, its embargoed, sanctioned oil to China. And those who've been using the excuse of Chinese demand not being very strong and therefore oil should be low, they're running out of excuses and they're running out of time.
Dan, anyone who's tuned in to Fuel for Thought over the years with you and I has learned that, yes, we talk about energy and energy pricing and trends, but we also talk about a lot of other things in the political realm, taking advantage of your 18 years as a sitting Liberal MP plus your decades in and around the political arena. The last few days, lots to talk about, all kinds of things happening. You and I have talked about this, especially you, for a long time, that Mark Carney was probably going to be a front runner to take over the Liberal Party. Interesting start to the first couple of days of Mr. Carney's public run. He went on an American talk show late night to kind of tease it, then announces it. There was a situation where apparently his campaign logo was copying off one that already existed for a company. His announcement about his leadership bid was deemed a private event, and by accounts on social media, there were three accredited journalists removed from his announcement by law enforcement, calling himself an outsider, which everyone knows he's not. Dan, what do you make of the first few days of Mr. Carney introducing himself to Canada?
Well, this is really last chance saloon for the Liberal Party, which, for all intents and purposes, is going to lose the next federal election. Doesn't matter who the leader is. You could have, Pierre Elliott Trudeau come back, rise from the dead, and become its leader. It still will not be enough. I think the damage that's been done to Canadians is notable. It is a party that has, I think, in many respects, become very toxic to Canadians, as well as those policies. And no matter whether or not they equivocate or prevaricate on terms of policies, they're all really tarred and stained with the same brush. And so I'm not sure what will come of this in terms of perhaps mitigating the loss in the next election. Maybe they go from, fourth place party to second or third place party. Either way, they're not going to catch Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, whether one likes it or not. That's simply a reality of our system. But it also allows us time to reflect on who people like Mark Carney are. We know Chrystia Freeland, and it's left us with a $62 billion deficit, and finances in trouble, and on the eve of what could be tariffs for the country. We don't know how that's going to play out. But Mr. Carney himself has had a lot to do with moving money away from Canada, divesting from Canada, especially its oil and gas sector. So when people in New Brunswick, 25,000 people who could have used work for Energy East no longer have a pipeline that could have delivered oil to the rest of the world that desperately needs it, or LNG. Or people in Newfoundland who lost Equinor and their $2 billion investment in the oil fields there that could have raised significant capital and paid for a lot of social programs, or pipelines across the country, or carbon taxes, which are hammering and bleeding Canadians left and right, regardless of the shell game of we'll give you a couple pennies back in a rebate as we take more from you. Mr. Carney has a lot to explain in terms of his role in harming Canada. Yes, we know he wasn't a politician. He calls himself an outsider. Baloney. He started something called the GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, in which he encouraged our banks, lending institutions, not to put money towards natural gas and, if you can believe it, oil, the very largest, most important, dynamic sector, energy, in terms of raising funds for the country for our social programs. He tried to cripple it. His company, which of course is Brookfield, decided to buy some pipelines in Brazil and in the Middle East, while dumping on and preventing funding from getting to Canadian pipelines that they're desperately needed, not just for Canada, because look at the value of their Canadian dollar, 144 pennies to buy $1. That's 27 cents added to the price of your gasoline. Imagine what it's doing to your food bill. So all this aside, it's very easy to figure out where Mr. Carney is coming from. But not to take too much away from him, I thought his presentation yesterday was a dud. I don't think it went over very well. Throwing journalists out that you happen to disagree with, not a very wise way of demonstrating that you're a big tent person that's willing to change from the previous or the current government that we have. All in all, I think it's going to be very easy for Mr. Poilievre to clean Mr. Carney's clock.
And you mentioned, the organization that he set up, revolving around net zero. Over the last few weeks, we've seen major financial institutions pull back from that net zero approach. We've seen now that subsidies for EVs have been eliminated. Dan, this is all stuff that you've talked about and predicted for months and months and months. So much of what we're seeing with Mr. Trudeau stepping aside, the Liberal Party being reduced to, fighting for its life, Mr. Carney coming on board, the net zero thing kind of dissipating, the EV mandates going away. This is all stuff you've talked about. Why do you feel that people have been so unwilling to kind of listen to this and to realize that this was kind of where things were going?
Well, people have sold a bill of goods that they believed all these things would happen and that there'd be no consequences. But as for me, I mean, I'd rather have been right and taken all this criticism than to have been wrong just to get everybody's side and be cool and trendy, given the damage that it's done to Canada. And there are people out there who are going to say, well, it doesn't bother me. I work for the government. I get a paycheck every week, or, I get grift. I get some, finances from a friend, or I'm cool. I'm retired. I had a lot of whatever. Good on you. I'm more concerned about the generational impact. There's a reason why young people are walking away from the Liberal Party and the NDP in droves. They can't afford, they know that they've been rooked, they know they've been robbed. This isn't about Dan McTeague. This is simply saying, folks have had experience in the private sector, automotive, energy, banking. And of course, 18 years as a veteran member of parliament for the Liberal Party, when it was the Liberal Party. Back in the days in which it looked for issues like, promoting social security rather than socialism, and coming up with ideas that were designed to create consensus and create and build a better country, knowing that every step that we took had to be measured against the idea that we were going to wind up hurting somebody. Everything that I've said, that you and I have talked about over the past several years, Scott, has been designed not to mock those who disagree, but to actually warn Canadians that where they're heading here with these kind of woke programs was something that was going to be extraordinarily deadly for Canada and very, very tough for generations to come. And at the end of the day, I take no pride in the fact that I was right, but most importantly, that those out there who were wrong refuse to concede that and are still willing to spend their time voting for the Mark Carneys of this world.
One thing that politics teaches us time and again is that it's very unpredictable. We don't know as we sit here on the 17th of January what's going to happen with the federal election. But again, Dan, using your experience and your insights, again, kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit, what's your best guess? Where do you think it's going with the leadership? Obviously, it looks like it's boiling down between Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland. Apparently, they're very tight and close friends. Not sure that there's a big difference in two of them policy-wise, but who do you see coming out on top? And again, you've mentioned that you think that Mr. Poilievre is going to win the federal election, but kind of map it out. Where do you see it all going, Dan? Just from your best guess.
Well, I think it's basically a question of deciding and having a lot of fun over and speculating, who will have the best seat on the deck of the Titanic. Look, this party is finished. It's done. It's done significant harm to Canadians. It's ruined our outlook, and it doesn't matter if it was Trudeau or the effete caucus that supported him through thick and thin and basically supported him foursquare on all these bad policies. If they have any declaration to make right now about changing policies, it's deathbed repentance. And it looks like the Liberals are heading towards that in some of their net zero climate policies, but there are many others where they've made some colossal mistakes and for which the country has had to pay an extraordinarily high price, one that was completely unnecessary. And now we find ourselves at the 12th hour on the precipice of a 25% tariff, which is going to have enormous reverberations economically and otherwise for Canada. We can't blame Donald Trump for these things, but we can blame Canadians for having gone along with these folks that have been the Pied Pipers of the kind of things that have hurt Canada. And I think that has a lot to do with the kind of policies that we have advocated in this country that we've gone along with that have been extraordinarily detrimental to our bottom line. We need to fix that. Time may have gone and passed for us to do that before the damage was done, but there is still that hope, that opportunity, and Canadians have to be absolutely resolute in getting rid of an ideology that is very much pitted against Canada's interests and the things that make us tick as a country. Prosperity based on energy, based on mining, based on agriculture, based on getting our products to market, and be damned with these ideas that somehow CO2 and a couple of molecules are going to bring the world to an end. We know that's not true. We know it's catastrophism at its worst. And that kind of alarmism has no basis in the policy decisions or direction of this country. A real Canadian politician will stand up for his constituents and damn the torpedoes, not do what these people did. And that's to fall in line with very weird ideologies that at the end of the day are driven by the Greta Thunbergs of this world rather than people who know what the hell they're talking about.
Dan, it's often said that Saturday Night Live, late night talk shows enjoy the election cycle for obvious reasons. Always lots of material, lots to talk about. And that's the reason we love it here at Fuel for Thought. It gives us lots to talk about, lots to chew on, so to speak. And I know that there's going to be lots more in the weeks and months ahead. Appreciate your time as always. I know you got a busy schedule, so we'll sign off for now. Say thank you. Have a fantastic weekend ahead, and we'll look forward to doing this again next week, Dan.
Looking forward to it, Scott. Thanks for having me as usual.
Pleasure as always, sir.